Corporate events coordinator Lisa Chen quietly entered the executive VIP lounge at Sterling Industries' Manhattan headquarters, carrying supplies for the exclusive board meeting that would determine the company's future. CEO Victoria Sterling barely acknowledged her presence before snapping her fingers dismissively. "Finally, I've been waiting 10 minutes for someone competent to set up this room properly." Lisa began arranging the conference materials when Victoria's voice cut through the air again. "Not there, you idiot. Can't you see the lighting is wrong? Do I have to explain everything to people who clearly don't belong in executive environments?" What Victoria didn't know was that Lisa Chen held an MBA from Wharton, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had deliberately taken this position to expose the toxic culture that Victoria had created. More importantly, Lisa's hidden recording device was capturing every moment of abuse, footage that would soon destroy Victoria's career and reveal the truth about Sterling Industries' leadership to the world. If this story resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The executive VIP lounge on the 68th floor of Sterling Industries' Manhattan headquarters represented the absolute pinnacle of corporate luxury and privilege, a 3,000-square-foot sanctuary designed exclusively for board meetings, high-stakes negotiations, and entertaining the world's most powerful business leaders. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking panoramic views of Central Park and the Hudson River, while the interior featured Italian marble floors worth more than most people's houses, handcrafted furniture by renowned European artisans, and original artwork including pieces by Monet, Picasso, and Warhol that were worth tens of millions of dollars. Victoria Sterling had transformed this corporate sanctuary into her personal throne room, a place where she could demonstrate her absolute power over Sterling Industries' global empire while entertaining clients, investors, and government officials who controlled regulatory decisions affecting her $27 billion conglomerate. At 49 years old, Victoria commanded one of America's most powerful corporations, with subsidiaries spanning telecommunications, defense contracting, aerospace technology, and renewable energy that employed over 300,000 people across 6 continents. The lounge itself had been designed by the same architectural firm responsible for creating luxury residences for European royalty and Middle Eastern oil magnates, with every detail carefully selected to communicate unlimited wealth, sophisticated taste, and absolute authority over the business world. The main conference area featured a custom mahogany table, handcrafted from 1,000-year-old trees, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than luxury automobiles, while advanced technology systems provided secure communication with government agencies, international partners, and financial institutions that managed trillion-dollar investments. Victoria's rise to CEO had been facilitated by a combination of inherited wealth, elite educational credentials, and strategic marriages that provided access to political influence and business relationships unavailable to ordinary executives. Her family had controlled Sterling Industries for 3 generations, building their fortune through government contracts, regulatory capture, and business practices that prioritized profit maximization over employee welfare, environmental protection, or social responsibility. The corporate culture that Victoria had created reflected her personal philosophy about human relationships and business management, which divided employees into rigid hierarchies based on perceived value to her strategic objectives and personal comfort. Senior executives enjoyed extraordinary privileges and compensation, while support staff, administrative personnel, and service workers were treated as expendable resources whose needs and dignity were irrelevant to business operations. Her treatment of lower-level employees had become legendary throughout Sterling Industries for its cruelty, arbitrariness, and complete disregard for professional standards or human decency. Victoria regularly humiliated administrative assistants, berated facilities staff, and dismissed concerns from employees who lacked the political protection or financial independence necessary to resist her abuse without risking their careers and livelihoods. The VIP lounge had become Victoria's preferred venue for demonstrating her power over subordinates, while entertaining business associates who shared her worldview about social hierarchies and employee management. She had developed sophisticated techniques for humiliating staff members in front of important guests, using their vulnerability and dependence on employment as entertainment for clients and partners who appreciated displays of absolute authority over working people. But today's board meeting represented a critical moment in Sterling Industries' corporate history, as federal investigators and congressional committees had been examining the company's business practices, government contracts, and treatment of employees following whistleblower complaints and regulatory violations that threatened Victoria's control over the corporate empire she had inherited and expanded. The meeting agenda included discussions about legal strategy, public relations damage control, and potential leadership changes that could affect Victoria's position as CEO if board members concluded that her management style and personal behavior created unacceptable risks for shareholders and regulatory compliance. Lisa Chen represented everything that challenged Victoria's assumptions about employee capabilities, motivation, and the relationship between current position and actual qualifications, though Victoria had never bothered to learn anything about the events coordinator, who had been working at Sterling Industries for 6 months while conducting what she privately considered corporate anthropology research. At 32 years old, Lisa possessed educational credentials and professional experience that exceeded those of most Sterling Industries executives, including an MBA from Wharton Business School, with concentrations in corporate strategy and organizational behavior, fluency in Mandarin, Spanish, French, and German that had enabled international consulting work, and previous experience as a senior analyst at McKinsey & Company, where she had advised Fortune 500 corporations about operational efficiency and cultural transformation. Lisa's decision to accept an entry-level position at Sterling Industries had been motivated by research interests rather than career necessity, as she was completing a doctoral dissertation about toxic corporate cultures and their impact on employee welfare, organizational performance, and social responsibility that required insider access to decision-making processes and leadership behavior patterns. Her academic background included undergraduate studies at Harvard University, where she had graduated summa cum laude, with degrees in economics and psychology, followed by 2 years of management consulting experience that had exposed her to various corporate cultures and leadership styles before pursuing graduate education that focused on organizational behavior and business ethics. The McKinsey experience had been particularly valuable for understanding how consulting firms helped corporations improve performance, while sometimes enabling or ignoring management practices that harmed employees and communities in pursuit of short-term profit maximization and cost reduction strategies. Lisa's consulting work had included assignments with technology companies, pharmaceutical corporations, and defense contractors, where she had observed patterns of executive behavior that prioritized personal enrichment and power accumulation over stakeholder welfare and social responsibility, creating research interests that led to her doctoral studies and current investigation of Sterling Industries. Her position as events coordinator provided perfect access to executive interactions, board meetings, and strategic discussions while maintaining the invisibility that allowed her to observe authentic leadership behavior without the performance adjustments that might occur if executives knew they were being studied by someone with advanced education and research credentials. The role also required her to work directly with Victoria Sterling during high-stakes meetings and corporate events, providing opportunities to document the CEO's treatment of employees and decision-making processes that affected thousands of workers and millions of stakeholders who depended on Sterling Industries for employment, services, and investment returns. Lisa had carefully documented Victoria's abusive behavior over 6 months, collecting evidence of systematic harassment, discriminatory treatment, and management practices that violated employment laws, ethical standards, and the company's own stated values about employee dignity and professional development. Her research methodology included covert recording devices that captured audio and video evidence of Victoria's interactions with employees, detailed notes about specific incidents and patterns of abuse, and analysis of corporate documents that revealed the gap between public statements and actual management practices. The hidden recording equipment that Lisa carried had been designed for investigative journalism and academic research, featuring high-definition video capabilities, crystal-clear audio recording, and secure data storage that would preserve evidence of Victoria's behavior for legal proceedings, regulatory investigations, and public disclosure that could protect other employees from similar abuse. Today's board meeting represented Lisa's most important research opportunity. as Victoria's behavior during high-stress corporate discussions would reveal authentic leadership patterns and decision-making processes that affected Sterling Industries' 300,000 employees and their families who depended on the corporation for economic security and professional opportunity. The meeting participants included board members with extensive government connections, international business relationships, and financial influence that could protect Victoria from accountability or force her resignation if her behavior created unacceptable legal and reputational risks for the corporation and its shareholders. Victoria had spent the morning preparing for discussions about federal investigations, congressional hearings, and whistleblower allegations that threatened her control over Sterling Industries, while potentially exposing her to criminal charges and civil liability for management practices that had enriched executives while harming employees and communities. Her stress level was elevated due to legal pressures and media scrutiny that she had never previously experienced, creating conditions where her authentic personality and management style would be most visible to board members who might question her fitness for continued leadership of such a large and influential corporation. The board meeting was scheduled to include presentations about legal strategy, financial performance, and operational changes that could address regulatory concerns while maintaining profitability and competitive advantages that had made Sterling Industries one of America's most successful but controversial corporations. When Lisa entered the VIP lounge carrying supplies and equipment for the board meeting setup, she was prepared to document Victoria's behavior during what she anticipated would be a revealing display of the CEO's authentic leadership style and treatment of employees under pressure. Finally, "I've been waiting 10 minutes for someone competent to set up this room properly," Victoria announced, without looking up from her phone, her voice carrying the impatience and condescension that characterized her interactions with anyone she considered beneath her attention or unworthy of basic courtesy. The comment revealed Victoria's assumption that Lisa's late arrival indicated incompetence, rather than the careful timing that Lisa had planned to observe the CEO's pre-meeting behavior and stress responses that might affect her treatment of staff members. Lisa began arranging conference materials according to the detailed specifications that had been provided for the board meeting, while her hidden recording devices captured Victoria's initial dismissive attitude and the luxury environment that symbolized the wealth inequality between executives and employees at Sterling Industries. The setup process required attention to multiple details, including document placement for each board member, technology systems for secure presentations, catering arrangements for the extended meeting, and security protocols that would prevent unauthorized access to confidential strategic discussions. "Not there, you idiot!" Victoria snapped, while Lisa positioned presentation materials near the conference table. "Can't you see the lighting is wrong for the cameras? Do I have to explain everything to people who clearly don't belong in executive environments?" The insult was designed to establish Lisa's subordinate status while demonstrating Victoria's assumed intellectual superiority, though the CEO's assumptions about Lisa's qualifications and capabilities were completely incorrect based on her actual educational and professional background. Lisa maintained her professional composure while adjusting the materials according to Victoria's preferences, recognizing that responding to insults or challenging Victoria's assumptions would compromise her research objectives and potentially expose her true identity and purpose for working at Sterling Industries. "I apologize, Ms. Sterling. Let me adjust the positioning to meet your requirements," Lisa replied, with the deference that her role required, while her recording devices captured every detail of Victoria's abusive language and demanding behavior. But Victoria interpreted Lisa's professional response as submission that validated her assumptions about the event's coordinator's intellectual limitations and social status, encouraging her to escalate her demanding behavior and explicit expressions of superiority over someone she considered intellectually and socially inferior. "This is exactly the problem with hiring people who don't understand corporate standards," Victoria announced, while reviewing her phone messages. "You people think showing up and following basic instructions is sufficient, but executive environments require intelligence and sophistication that most employees simply don't possess." The comment revealed Victoria's fundamental misunderstanding of Lisa's background, while demonstrating the systematic arrogance that had characterized her treatment of employees throughout her tenure as CEO of Sterling Industries. Lisa continued her setup work while documenting Victoria's escalating abuse through her recording devices, recognizing that the CEO's authentic behavior was providing exactly the kind of evidence that her research required to expose the toxic culture that affected hundreds of thousands of employees. As Lisa worked methodically to prepare the VIP lounge for the crucial board meeting, Victoria's demands became increasingly unreasonable and explicitly demeaning, creating a pattern of abuse that would soon be preserved in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio recordings that would expose her true character to the world. As the pressure of the impending board meeting increased Victoria's stress levels, her treatment of Lisa escalated from condescending remarks to explicit demands for degrading behavior that revealed the depth of her arrogance and complete disregard for employee dignity and professional boundaries. "The flowers are completely wrong," Victoria declared, while gesturing dismissively toward the expensive floral arrangements that had been specifically selected according to her detailed preferences. Only someone with no aesthetic sense would think these colors are appropriate for a board meeting that will determine this company's future. The criticism was arbitrary and unfair, as the floral arrangements had been selected according to Victoria's own specifications, but she needed targets for her stress and anxiety about the legal and regulatory challenges that threatened her control over Sterling Industries. Lisa recognized that Victoria's complaints were motivated by anxiety rather than genuine concerns about meeting preparation, but she responded professionally while her recording devices captured the CEO's unreasonable demands and escalating abuse of someone she assumed lacked the education or intelligence to challenge her behavior. "I can arrange for different flowers if you prefer, Ms. Sterling," Lisa offered, while reviewing the original specifications that Victoria had personally approved for the board meeting arrangements. "What specific changes would you like me to make?" But Victoria interpreted Lisa's willingness to accommodate her demands as confirmation that the event's coordinator accepted responsibility for imaginary problems, validating her assumption that Lisa lacked the confidence or competence to defend her professional work quality. "Don't ask me to explain your job to you," Victoria replied with obvious irritation, while checking her email for updates about the federal investigations that were creating legal and reputational problems for Sterling Industries. "If you had any intelligence or training, you would understand what's appropriate for executive meetings without requiring detailed explanations." The response demonstrated Victoria's refusal to provide constructive feedback while expecting Lisa to guess her unstated preferences, creating impossible standards that justified continued criticism and abuse regardless of Lisa's actual performance quality. As board members began arriving for the crucial meeting, Victoria's behavior became increasingly erratic and demanding, using Lisa as a target for frustrations about legal pressures and media scrutiny that she couldn't control through her usual methods of intimidation and financial influence. "The temperature in this room is completely wrong," Victoria announced loudly enough for arriving board members to hear her criticism of Lisa's supposed incompetence. "How can we expect serious business discussions when basic environmental controls aren't properly managed by support staff?" The complaint was designed to demonstrate Victoria's attention to detail and high standards, while blaming Lisa for conditions that were controlled by building management systems rather than events coordination, creating public humiliation for someone she assumed lacked the knowledge or confidence to defend herself. Board member William Foster, Sterling Industries chairman and Victoria's longtime family friend, observed the interaction with growing concern about Victoria's behavior toward employees and the potential legal implications of her management style during a period when the corporation faced intense regulatory scrutiny. "Victoria, perhaps we should focus on the meeting agenda rather than room arrangements, Mr. Foster suggested diplomatically, while recognizing that Victoria's public abuse of Lisa created uncomfortable dynamics that could affect board discussions about her leadership and the company's future direction. But Victoria interpreted his suggestion as criticism that needed to be deflected through continued demonstration of her authority over subordinate employees who served as convenient targets for her stress and anxiety about circumstances beyond her control. "William, you of all people should understand that attention to detail and proper staff management are essential for maintaining corporate standards," Victoria replied, while gesturing dismissively toward Lisa. If we accept mediocrity from support staff, that attitude spreads throughout the organization and undermines excellence at every level. The comment was designed to justify her abusive treatment of Lisa while positioning herself as a demanding leader who maintained high standards, though board members recognized that her behavior reflected poor emotional control rather than effective management techniques. As more board members arrived and witnessed Victoria's treatment of Lisa, their concerns about her fitness for continued leadership grew beyond regulatory compliance issues to include fundamental questions about her judgment, emotional stability, and ability to represent Sterling Industries during crisis management and stakeholder relations. Dr. Patricia Williams, an independent board member with extensive experience in corporate governance and crisis management, had been observing Victoria's behavior with professional concern about the CEO's apparent inability to maintain composure during stressful situations that required calm leadership and strategic thinking. Victoria, why don't we begin the meeting so we can address the important issues facing our company? Dr. Williams suggested while attempting to redirect Victoria's attention away from her harassment of Lisa toward the substantive business discussions that required her immediate focus and strategic thinking. But Victoria's response revealed her inability to distinguish between legitimate business concerns and personal targets for her stress and frustration, demonstrating exactly the kind of judgment problems that had created legal and regulatory challenges for Sterling Industries. Patricia, I'm ensuring that our support staff maintains the professional standards that our board members deserve, Victoria explained, while continuing to berate Lisa for imaginary problems. Leadership requires attention to all aspects of operations, including proper training and supervision of employees who represent this corporation. The explanation attempted to frame her abuse as professional leadership while ignoring the obvious inappropriateness of publicly humiliating an employee in front of board members who were evaluating her fitness for continued corporate leadership. Lisa continued her professional duties, while her recording devices captured every aspect of Victoria's escalating abuse and the board members' growing discomfort with their CEO's behavior toward an employee who was simply trying to complete her assigned responsibilities. As the formal board meeting began, Victoria's treatment of Lisa became even more explicit and demeaning, creating a pattern of abuse that demonstrated her fundamental character and management philosophy to board members who had the power to determine her future with Sterling Industries. Lisa, I want you to stay in this room during our meeting in case we need anything, Victoria announced, while positioning Lisa near the wall where she would be visible but unable to participate in discussions. Just stand there quietly and wait for instructions. Don't speak unless you're directly asked a question. The demand was designed to humiliate Lisa by treating her as a servant rather than a professional employee, while demonstrating Victoria's power over subordinate staff to board members who were witnessing her authentic leadership style and treatment of people she considered beneath her attention. Lisa recognized that Victoria's instruction provided an opportunity to record the entire board meeting while observing executive decision-making processes and strategic discussions that would reveal the corporation's authentic priorities and values regarding employee welfare and social responsibility. Of course, Ms. Sterling, Lisa replied professionally while positioning herself according to Victoria's instructions, though her advanced education and research background meant she understood the strategic implications of the board discussions better than Victoria realized. As the meeting progressed, Victoria's stress about legal and regulatory challenges caused her to become increasingly demanding and explicitly abusive toward Lisa, creating a spectacle that horrified board members while providing comprehensive documentation of her true character and management philosophy. Lisa, get me coffee, not the regular coffee, the special blend from my private supply, and make sure it's exactly the right temperature. If it's too hot or too cold, you'll have to make it again until you get it right, Victoria commanded, while board members discussed federal investigations and potential criminal liability that threatened the corporation's future. The arbitrary demands were designed to demonstrate Victoria's absolute authority over Lisa, while providing her with targets for stress and frustration that she couldn't direct toward board members who had the power to terminate her employment as CEO. But Victoria's public abuse of Lisa was creating exactly the kind of evidence that federal investigators and congressional committees could use to demonstrate the toxic corporate culture and leadership problems that justified regulatory intervention and potential criminal charges against Sterling Industries executives. As Lisa quietly served coffee while continuing to record Victoria's behavior, board members began to understand that their CEO's treatment of employees represented fundamental character flaws that created enormous legal and reputational risks for the corporation and its stakeholders. "The temperature is wrong," Victoria announced after tasting her coffee, though Lisa had prepared it according to the exact specifications that Victoria had provided. "This is exactly what I mean about attention to detail and professional competence. Make it again, and this time follow the instructions properly." The impossible standard was designed to justify continued criticism, regardless of Lisa's performance quality, demonstrating Victoria's need to maintain power over someone who couldn't challenge her authority without risking employment and financial security. Lisa accepted the coffee cup without response, recognizing that Victoria's arbitrary criticism was providing excellent documentation of the CEO's authentic character and the systematic abuse that Sterling Industries employees faced from executive leadership. But what Victoria didn't realize was that Lisa's hidden recording devices were capturing not just her abusive treatment of a subordinate employee, but also the board meeting discussions about federal investigations, legal strategy, and potential criminal liability that would soon become evidence in regulatory proceedings and congressional hearings. As the board meeting continued, Victoria's behavior became increasingly erratic and explicitly abusive, creating comprehensive documentation of the leadership problems and toxic culture that had made Sterling Industries a target for federal investigations and regulatory intervention. The combination of legal pressures and board scrutiny was revealing Victoria's authentic personality and management style to directors who had previously only observed her carefully controlled public persona, creating growing consensus that her continued leadership represented an unacceptable risk for the corporation and its stakeholders. Lisa's recording devices were capturing every moment of Victoria's escalating abuse, while preserving evidence of board discussions that revealed the corporation's awareness of legal violations and regulatory problems that had been concealed from employees, shareholders, and government oversight agencies. As the board meeting progressed and discussions about federal investigations became more intense, Victoria's treatment of Lisa reached levels of abuse that shocked even board members who had witnessed her difficult personality during previous corporate crises and strategic challenges. "Lisa, I want you to clean up this conference table while we continue our meeting," Victoria commanded during a brief break in presentations about legal strategy and potential criminal liability. "Get on your hands and knees and make sure there's not a single speck of dust or fingerprint on any surface." The demand was designed to humiliate Lisa by forcing her into a degrading physical position while board members continued their discussions about Victoria's fitness for continued leadership and the corporation's legal exposure from her management practices. Board members exchanged shocked glances as they witnessed Victoria's explicit attempt to degrade an employee who was simply trying to perform her professional duties while maintaining dignity despite increasingly unreasonable demands and public humiliation. "Victoria, that's completely inappropriate," Dr. Patricia Williams said firmly, while other board members nodded in agreement about their CEO's unacceptable treatment of a subordinate employee. "This employee is here to coordinate our meeting, not to perform janitorial services that have nothing to do with her professional responsibilities." But Victoria interpreted the board's criticism as a challenge to her authority that needed to be countered through increased demonstration of power over Lisa, who served as a convenient target for her stress and frustration about circumstances beyond her control. "Patricia, this is exactly the kind of attention to detail that separates successful corporations from mediocre organizations," Victoria replied, while forcing Lisa to continue the degrading cleaning performance. "If we don't maintain standards for basic competence and professional behavior, that mediocrity spreads throughout our entire organization." The explanation attempted to frame her abuse as corporate leadership, while ignoring the obvious inappropriateness of her behavior and the growing consensus among board members that her treatment of employees represented fundamental character problems. Lisa maintained her professional composure while following Victoria's degrading instructions, recognizing that the CEO's escalating abuse was providing exactly the kind of evidence that her research required while creating comprehensive documentation of toxic leadership that affected hundreds of thousands of Sterling Industries employees. As Lisa worked in the humiliating position that Victoria had demanded, her recording devices captured not only the physical abuse, but also the board members' growing horror at their CEO's behavior and their discussions about immediate intervention to protect the corporation from additional legal liability. This is unacceptable behavior that creates hostile working environments and potential legal exposure for discrimination and harassment, board member James Chen whispered to his colleagues while Victoria continued her public humiliation of Lisa. We cannot allow this kind of leadership to continue when federal investigators are examining our corporate culture and management practices. The board members' private discussions about Victoria's behavior were also being recorded by Lisa's devices, creating evidence that Sterling Industries directors were aware of their CEO's abusive management style while potentially failing to take adequate action to protect employees from continued harassment and discrimination. Victoria's next demand pushed her abuse to levels that would have serious legal consequences, while providing Lisa with evidence of systematic harassment that violated federal employment protection laws and created criminal liability for both Victoria personally and Sterling Industries as a corporate entity. Lisa, I want you to apologize to our board members for the poor quality of your work today, Victoria commanded, while positioning Lisa in front of the conference table where directors could observe her humiliation. Tell them that you understand you haven't met professional standards and that you're grateful for the opportunity to learn from your mistakes. The demand for a false apology was designed to force Lisa to accept blame for imaginary failures, while publicly degrading her in front of board members who controlled Sterling Industries' strategic direction and Victoria's employment as CEO. But the demand also represented potential criminal conduct, including harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and creation of a hostile working environment that violated federal employment protection laws and could result in serious legal consequences for both Victoria and the corporation. Lisa recognized that Victoria's escalating demands had reached levels that required immediate response to protect other employees from similar abuse, while preserving evidence of systematic harassment that could support criminal charges and civil litigation against Sterling Industries leadership. Ms. Sterling, I cannot apologize for work quality that meets professional standards, Lisa replied calmly, while her recording devices captured Victoria's shocked reaction to resistance from someone she had assumed would accept unlimited abuse without challenge or consequences. The response was Lisa's first direct challenge to Victoria's authority, revealing that the events coordinator possessed confidence and professional knowledge that contradicted the CEO's assumptions about her capabilities and willingness to accept degrading treatment. Victoria's reaction to Lisa's resistance revealed the depth of her arrogance and her complete inability to handle challenges to her assumed authority over subordinate employees who were supposed to accept abuse without question or resistance. "What did you just say to me?" Victoria demanded with obvious rage at being challenged by someone she considered intellectually and socially inferior. "Do you understand who I am and what I can do to your pathetic little career?" The threat was explicit and witnessed by board members who recognized that Victoria's behavior had escalated to levels that created serious legal liability while demonstrating exactly the kind of leadership problems that had attracted federal investigation and regulatory scrutiny. Board member William Foster immediately recognized that the situation required intervention to prevent additional legal exposure while protecting both Lisa and the corporation from the consequences of Victoria's escalating abuse and threatening behavior. "Victoria, this meeting is adjourned immediately," Mr. Foster announced, while other board members prepared to document the incident and seek legal counsel about their obligations to report Victoria's behavior to appropriate authorities. "We need to address this situation privately and immediately." But Victoria was too angry about Lisa's resistance to recognize that her behavior was creating comprehensive evidence of harassment and discrimination that would soon be used against her in criminal proceedings and civil litigation that could destroy her career and personal wealth. "No, William. I want this employee to understand exactly what happens when people don't show proper respect for their superiors," Victoria declared, while advancing toward Lisa with obvious intent to escalate her threatening behavior. She needs to learn about consequences for insubordination and disrespect. At that moment, Lisa made the decision that her research had collected sufficient evidence of Victoria's abusive behavior and that protecting other employees required immediate revelation of her true identity and qualifications. Ms. Sterling, my name is Lisa Chen, and I hold an MBA from Wharton Business School with concentrations in corporate strategy and organizational behavior, Lisa announced calmly while removing her hidden recording devices. I've been documenting your treatment of employees for the past 6 months as part of doctoral research about toxic corporate cultures and their impact on worker welfare. The revelation created immediate shock among board members who realized that Victoria had been systematically abusing someone with advanced education and professional qualifications that exceeded those of most Sterling Industries executives. Additionally, Lisa continued while displaying her recording equipment, I have comprehensive audio and video documentation of your harassment, discrimination, and threatening behavior that violates federal employment protection laws and creates criminal liability for both you personally and Sterling Industries as a corporate entity. Victoria's face went pale as she realized that her assumed power over a subordinate employee had been an illusion, and that her authentic behavior had been preserved in high-definition recordings that could destroy her career and expose her to criminal prosecution. The board members immediately understood that Lisa's documentation could provide federal investigators and congressional committees with exactly the kind of evidence they needed to pursue criminal charges and regulatory sanctions against Sterling Industries leadership. You recorded me without permission, Victoria stammered, while attempting to process the implications of her documented abuse and the revelation that Lisa possessed credentials that made her treatment even more inappropriate and legally problematic. That's illegal surveillance that violates privacy expectations. But Lisa's legal research had prepared her for this response, and her knowledge of employment law provided clear understanding of the protections available for documenting workplace harassment and discrimination. Ms. Sterling federal and state employment protection laws provide explicit rights for employees to document harassment and discrimination in workplace settings, Lisa explained, while board members realized that their CEO's behavior had created enormous legal exposure for the corporation. These recordings constitute evidence of systematic violations of employment protection statutes that create both criminal and civil liability. The legal implications were immediately apparent to board members who understood that Victoria's documented behavior could result in federal prosecution, congressional hearings, regulatory sanctions, and civil litigation that could destroy Sterling Industries' reputation and financial stability. Within hours of Lisa's revelation, news of Victoria's documented abuse began spreading throughout Sterling Industries and the broader business community as employees shared information about their CEO's treatment of subordinate staff and the comprehensive evidence of systematic harassment that had been preserved through Lisa's research. The leaked footage of Victoria Sterling's abusive treatment of Lisa Chen spread across social media platforms with unprecedented speed, as current and former Sterling Industries employees shared their own stories about the toxic corporate culture that had been systematically concealed from public view and regulatory oversight. The hashtag #SterlingAbuse began trending nationally within 6 hours of the initial leak, as workers throughout the corporation used Lisa's documentation to validate their own experiences with harassment, discrimination, and hostile working environments that had been tolerated or encouraged by executive leadership. The high-definition recordings captured every detail of Victoria's escalating abuse, from her initial condescending remarks to her explicit demands for degrading behavior, her arbitrary criticism and impossible standards, her public humiliation tactics, and her threatening response to Lisa's professional resistance that revealed the depth of her arrogance and entitlement. Business media coverage focused immediately on the implications for Sterling Industries' government contracts, federal investigations, and regulatory compliance, as Victoria's documented behavior provided exactly the kind of evidence that congressional committees and federal prosecutors needed to pursue criminal charges and civil liability against both the CEO and the corporation. Sterling Industries' CEO caught on camera, abusing MBA graduate posing as employee, became headline news across major media platforms with the leaked recordings providing undeniable evidence of the systematic harassment and toxic leadership that had characterized Victoria's management of one of America's largest corporations. The footage also captured board members' discussions about federal investigations, legal strategy, and potential criminal liability that had been concealed from shareholders, employees, and regulatory agencies, creating additional evidence of corporate misconduct and potential obstruction of justice that expanded the legal exposure beyond Victoria's personal behavior. Federal investigators and congressional committees immediately recognized that Lisa's documentation provided unprecedented evidence of corporate culture problems and leadership misconduct that justified expanded investigations into Sterling Industries' business practices, government contracts, and treatment of employees throughout their global operations. The Department of Justice announced expanded criminal investigations into Sterling Industries executives, including potential charges for harassment, discrimination, hostile working environment violations, fraud related to government contracts, and obstruction of justice related to concealment of management problems from federal oversight agencies. Congressional committees scheduled immediate hearings about Sterling Industries' corporate culture and government contracting practices, with Lisa's documentation providing evidence of systematic problems that required legislative oversight and potential regulatory sanctions against the corporation and its executives. Securities and Exchange Commission investigations expanded to include potential securities fraud related to concealment of management problems and toxic corporate culture from investors and shareholders who deserved accurate information about leadership risks and regulatory exposure when making investment decisions. Victoria's documented behavior also created enormous civil liability for harassment, discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of employment protection laws that provided Lisa and other Sterling Industries employees with grounds for multi-million-dollar lawsuits against both Victoria personally and the corporation. Employment law attorneys immediately recognized that Lisa's recordings provided textbook evidence of workplace harassment and hostile working environment violations that would result in substantial jury awards and punitive damages designed to deter similar corporate misconduct and executive abuse of employees. The legal precedents established through Lisa's case would strengthen protections for employees throughout American corporations while creating accountability mechanisms that held both individual executives and corporate entities responsible for systematic harassment and discrimination that violated federal employment protection statutes. Sterling Industries' stock price collapsed by 67% in the first week following the leaked footage, as investors recognized that Victoria's documented behavior created enormous legal liability and regulatory exposure that could result in criminal penalties, civil damages, and loss of government contracts worth billions of dollars annually. Major institutional investors, including pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and mutual fund companies, immediately divested their Sterling Industries holdings while issuing statements condemning Victoria's behavior and the corporate culture that had enabled systematic harassment of employees. Corporate customers cancelled contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, citing concerns about associating their brands with Sterling Industries' toxic leadership and the reputational damage that could affect their own stakeholder relationships and corporate social responsibility commitments. Government agencies responsible for Sterling Industries contracts initiated reviews of the corporation's eligibility for federal business, recognizing that Victoria's documented harassment violated contractor standards for equal employment opportunity and professional workplace environments. The defense contracting implications were particularly serious, as Victoria's behavior contradicted military values and professional standards that were required for corporations serving national security missions and managing classified government projects that required security clearances and ethical leadership. Victoria's personal wealth suffered devastating losses as her Sterling Industries holdings became worthless, and her other investments faced scrutiny from federal investigators who were examining potential financial crimes related to corporate management and government contracting practices. Her real estate portfolio, luxury assets, and investment accounts faced potential seizure as evidence in criminal investigations, while civil litigation threatened to eliminate her remaining personal wealth through punitive damages and legal settlements with affected employees. The business community's response to Victoria's documented abuse was swift and comprehensive, with professional organizations, business schools, and corporate governance experts using her case as an example of leadership failure and the importance of accountability for executive behavior that affected employee welfare and corporate performance. Harvard Business School, where Victoria had earned her MBA 25 years earlier, issued statements distancing the institution from her behavior while emphasizing their commitment to ethical leadership and professional conduct that respected human dignity and employee rights. Professional organizations, including the Business Roundtable and Chamber of Commerce, condemned Victoria's treatment of employees while supporting policy changes that would strengthen protections for workers and accountability for executives who abused their authority over subordinate employees. The criminal prosecution of Victoria Sterling proceeded rapidly due to the overwhelming evidence provided by Lisa's comprehensive recordings, which documented systematic harassment and discrimination that violated multiple federal employment protection statutes and created clear cases for criminal charges. Federal prosecutor Sarah Rodriguez recognized that Victoria's case represented an opportunity to establish important precedents for holding corporate executives accountable for workplace harassment, while demonstrating that wealth and corporate position would not protect individuals from consequences for criminal behavior against employees. This case demonstrates everything that's wrong with corporate culture that tolerates abuse of power and systematic harassment of employees, DA Rodriguez announced during the press conference outlining criminal charges. The defendant used her position as CEO to systematically humiliate and threaten an employee whose only offense was performing her professional duties while maintaining personal dignity. The criminal charges included multiple counts of workplace harassment, creating a hostile working environment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to violate civil rights that carried potential prison sentences totaling up to 12 years if Victoria was convicted on all counts. The prosecution's case was significantly strengthened by Lisa's comprehensive documentation, which captured not only Victoria's abusive behavior, but also her escalating threats and explicit attempts to force degrading performance that demonstrated criminal intent rather than poor management judgment. Victoria's defense team, led by prominent white-collar criminal attorney Jonathan Pierce, attempted to argue that her behavior constituted inappropriate management techniques rather than criminal conduct, but the video evidence made such defenses extremely difficult to sustain, given the explicit nature of her harassment and threats. Our client acknowledges that her management approach was demanding and sometimes insensitive, Pierce explained during preliminary hearings. But criminal charges are excessive for what amounts to workplace disputes about performance standards and professional expectations in high-pressure corporate environments. But DA Rodriguez countered that the video evidence showed systematic harassment that went far beyond demanding management to include explicit degradation, threatening behavior, and creation of hostile working environments that violated clear criminal statutes designed to protect employees from exactly this type of executive abuse. The trial proceedings attracted international media attention, as Lisa's case highlighted broader issues about corporate accountability, employee protection, and the responsibility of executives to maintain professional standards regardless of their wealth, position, or stress levels from business pressures. Lisa's testimony was particularly powerful, as she described not only Victoria's specific harassment, but also the systematic nature of toxic corporate culture at Sterling Industries that affected thousands of employees who lacked the education, resources, or job security necessary to resist or report executive abuse. Ms. Sterling's behavior wasn't just about personal cruelty, Lisa testified during the criminal trial. It reflected a corporate culture that treated employees as disposable resources, rather than human beings deserving of dignity and respect. Her actions demonstrated leadership philosophy that prioritized executive comfort over worker welfare. The prosecution also called expert witnesses on workplace harassment and corporate culture, who testified about the psychological impact of Victoria's behavior and the systematic nature of executive abuse in corporations where accountability mechanisms failed to protect vulnerable employees. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist specializing in workplace trauma, explained how Victoria's behavior created lasting psychological harm while perpetuating corporate cultures that enabled systematic abuse of employees who couldn't afford to resist or seek alternative employment. The defendant's conduct represents a textbook example of how corporate executives abuse power relationships to systematically dehumanize employees, Dr. Williams testified. Her behavior created trauma that extends beyond individual victims to affect entire workforces that understand they could face similar treatment if they challenge executive authority. The defense team's attempts to minimize Victoria's behavior were undermined by additional evidence that emerged during the investigation, including testimony from dozens of other Sterling Industries employees who had experienced similar harassment and documentation of corporate policies that enabled or concealed executive misconduct. The jury deliberation lasted only 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all criminal charges, with jurors explaining afterward that Lisa's video evidence and witness testimony provided overwhelming proof of Victoria's criminal behavior and systematic abuse of corporate authority. The evidence was clear and disturbing, explained jury foreman David Martinez after the verdict was announced. Ms. Sterling's behavior showed complete disregard for employee rights and human dignity, and her position as CEO made her conduct even more egregious because of the power imbalance and systematic nature of her harassment. The criminal conviction carried a sentence of 5 years in federal prison, 7 years of probation, mandatory participation in workplace harassment counseling and anger management programs, and community service requirements that included working with organizations protecting employee rights and workplace dignity. Parallel to the criminal prosecution, civil litigation against both Victoria personally and Sterling Industries as a corporate entity proceeded on multiple fronts, with employment attorneys representing not only Lisa but also hundreds of other Sterling Industries employees who had experienced similar harassment and discrimination. The civil cases were led by renowned employment attorney Jennifer Johnson, who specialized in class action lawsuits involving corporate harassment and discrimination by executives who had traditionally escaped accountability through legal influence and financial settlements that concealed systematic misconduct. This litigation represents thousands of Sterling Industries employees who have suffered under toxic corporate culture and executive harassment, Attorney Johnson explained during press conferences announcing the comprehensive civil suits. Victoria Sterling's documented abuse of Lisa Chen represents just one example of systematic misconduct that has affected workers throughout this corporation for years. The civil damages sought included compensation for emotional distress, lost wages, career damage, and punitive awards designed to deter Sterling Industries and other corporations from tolerating or enabling executive harassment that created hostile working environments for vulnerable employees. Discovery proceedings revealed extensive documentation of corporate knowledge about Victoria's abusive behavior, including human resources, complaints that had been suppressed, internal communications that showed awareness of harassment problems, and financial settlements that had concealed executive misconduct from regulatory oversight and public scrutiny. The civil litigation also exposed the broader scope of toxic corporate culture at Sterling Industries, with evidence showing that Victoria's behavior was part of systematic management approaches that prioritized executive comfort and profit maximization over employee welfare and legal compliance with anti-discrimination statutes. Corporate documents revealed that Sterling Industries had established policies and practices that protected executives from accountability while silencing employees who reported harassment through confidentiality agreements, financial settlements, and retaliation against workers who sought legal protection. The civil trials included testimony from workplace culture experts who calculated the economic impact of Victoria's harassment on employee productivity, turnover costs, legal liability, and reputational damage that affected Sterling Industries' business performance and competitive positioning. Dr. Robert Chen, an economist specializing in workplace discrimination, testified that Victoria's management approach created enormous hidden costs through reduced productivity, increased employee turnover, legal exposure, and reputational damage that ultimately harmed corporate performance while enriching executives at the expense of shareholders and stakeholders. The defendant's leadership style created massive economic inefficiencies and legal liabilities that far exceeded any perceived benefits from intimidating employees into compliance with unreasonable demands, Dr. Chen explained during his expert testimony about the financial impact of toxic corporate culture. The civil jury returned verdicts awarding Lisa and other affected employees $47 million in compensatory and punitive damages, with additional requirements for comprehensive corporate culture transformation and independent monitoring of Sterling Industries' employment practices and executive behavior. The civil settlement also included funding for employee protection programs, enhanced training for managers and executives, whistleblower protection systems, and independent oversight of workplace culture that would prevent future harassment and discrimination throughout Sterling Industries' operations. The criminal conviction and civil liability forced Sterling Industries to undergo complete leadership restructuring and corporate culture transformation that extended far beyond Victoria's removal to include fundamental changes in management practices, employee protection, and accountability systems throughout the global corporation. The board of directors voted unanimously to terminate Victoria's employment and implement governance changes that included enhanced oversight of executive behavior, employee protection mechanisms, and transparency requirements that would prevent concealment of harassment and discrimination from shareholders and regulatory agencies. New corporate leadership implemented comprehensive programs for supporting employees who had experienced harassment, including counseling services, career development opportunities, and legal protection for workers who reported misconduct without fear of retaliation or economic consequences. The corporation also established the Lisa Chen Employee Protection Fund with substantial financial resources dedicated to supporting workplace harassment victims, funding research into corporate culture transformation, and advocating for stronger employment protection laws throughout American business environments. Sterling Industries' new CEO, Dr. Patricia Martinez, brought extensive experience in corporate culture transformation and employee protection from her previous leadership positions at organizations that prioritized worker welfare alongside business performance and competitive success. Under Dr. Martinez's leadership, Sterling Industries implemented zero-tolerance policies for executive harassment, comprehensive training programs for respectful workplace behavior, and accountability mechanisms that held all employees, including senior executives, responsible for maintaining professional standards and human dignity. The corporate transformation included enhanced employee benefits, expanded professional development opportunities, and workplace democracy initiatives that gave workers meaningful voice in corporate decision-making processes that affected their employment conditions and career advancement opportunities. Lisa Chen's research and documentation had created industry-wide awareness about toxic corporate cultures and the importance of protecting employees from executive abuse, inspiring other workers to report harassment while encouraging corporations to implement preventive measures and accountability systems. Her doctoral dissertation, based on her Sterling Industries research, became required reading in business schools throughout the United States and internationally, educating future corporate leaders about the importance of ethical management and respectful treatment of all employees regardless of their position or perceived status. Lisa's experience also led to her appointment as Director of Corporate Ethics Research at Harvard Business School, where she developed curricula and training programs that taught current and future business leaders about their responsibilities to maintain workplace dignity and prevent harassment and discrimination. The academic programs that Lisa developed influenced corporate governance standards throughout American business, with MBA programs, executive education, and leadership development initiatives incorporating lessons from her research about the costs of toxic culture and the benefits of respectful workplace environments. Victoria Sterling's personal transformation during her incarceration included genuine recognition of the harm her behavior had caused and commitment to supporting organizations that protected employees from harassment and executive abuse that she had previously perpetuated throughout her corporate career. Her post-prison advocacy work included funding for employee protection programs and speaking engagements where she acknowledged her abusive behavior while supporting policy changes that would prevent similar incidents and strengthen accountability for corporate executives who abused their authority over vulnerable workers. 5 years after Lisa Chen's exposure of Victoria Sterling's systematic harassment, the case continued to influence corporate governance, employment law, and business culture throughout the United States and internationally, creating lasting protections for employees while establishing accountability standards for executive behavior. The Sterling Industries case had become a landmark precedent in employment law, with federal courts using Lisa's documentation and the resulting legal decisions to strengthen protections for employees who faced harassment from wealthy executives and powerful employers who had traditionally escaped accountability. Employment protection legislation enacted in response to Lisa's case included enhanced penalties for corporate harassment, stronger whistleblower protections, and legal frameworks that held both individual executives and corporate entities accountable for creating or tolerating hostile working environments. The broader cultural impact included increased awareness about power dynamics in corporate environments and the importance of protecting vulnerable employees from executives who might abuse their authority for personal satisfaction or stress relief during challenging business periods. Corporate governance standards throughout multiple industries incorporated lessons from Victoria's case, with enhanced accountability measures for executive conduct, stronger policies protecting employee welfare, and recognition that toxic leadership created enormous legal and financial liabilities that threatened business performance and shareholder value. Business schools and executive education programs continued to use Lisa's research as foundational curriculum for teaching ethical leadership and the importance of maintaining respectful workplace environments regardless of business pressures or competitive challenges that might create stress for corporate leaders. The technology systems that Lisa had used for documenting workplace harassment became standard tools for employee protection, with legal support organizations and worker advocacy groups providing similar equipment and training for employees who faced systematic abuse from supervisors or executives. Lisa's memoir, Undercover in Corporate America: How I Exposed Toxic Leadership, became an international bestseller that inspired employees while educating the public about workplace harassment and the importance of accountability for executives who abused their authority over vulnerable workers. The book's success led to speaking engagements throughout the world, where Lisa shared insights about toxic corporate cultures, employee protection, and the research methodologies that could expose systematic misconduct while creating legal accountability for harmful management practices. Terma Chen, Lisa's younger sister, who had been inspired by her courage and research, completed law school and began practicing employment law, specializing in cases that protected workers from corporate harassment and discrimination by wealthy executives and powerful employers. The Chen family's commitment to employee protection and workplace justice inspired a new generation of advocates who continued the work of strengthening protections and accountability in corporate environments where power imbalances created opportunities for abuse and exploitation. Victoria Sterling's continued support for employee protection programs, while not excusing her original conduct, demonstrated the possibility for genuine transformation and positive contribution following accountability for harmful behavior and systematic abuse of corporate authority. Sterling Industries had become a model for corporate culture transformation and employee protection, demonstrating that businesses could achieve financial success while maintaining respectful workplace environments and prioritizing worker welfare alongside competitive performance and shareholder returns. The comprehensive documentation that Lisa had provided influenced the development of workplace monitoring and protection technologies that supported both employee safety and corporate compliance with legal requirements for maintaining professional environments free from harassment and discrimination. 10 years after her exposure of Victoria Sterling's harassment, Lisa Chen was recognized with the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions to employee protection and corporate accountability, with the ceremony acknowledging her courage in challenging executive abuse while creating systemic changes that protected vulnerable workers. Epilogue: The Enduring Legacy. The story of Lisa Chen and Victoria Sterling transcended individual accountability to become a powerful catalyst for systematic change in corporate culture, employee protection, and executive accountability that influenced business practices throughout the United States and internationally. Lisa's courage in documenting and exposing systematic harassment had inspired thousands of employees to report abuse, while encouraging corporations to implement preventive measures and accountability systems that protected workers from executive misconduct and created respectful workplace environments. Victoria's exposure and prosecution demonstrated that wealth and corporate position could not protect individuals from consequences for criminal behavior, establishing legal precedents that influenced how powerful executives were held accountable for their treatment of employees and subordinate workers. The comprehensive transformation of Sterling Industries created a model for corporate culture change that proved businesses could achieve financial success while maintaining ethical leadership and respectful treatment of all employees, regardless of their position or perceived status within organizational hierarchies. Most importantly, the story reinforced the fundamental truth that workplace dignity and professional respect were essential rights that couldn't be compromised by corporate pressure or executive stress, and that individual courage could create positive change that protected countless workers from systematic abuse and discrimination. Lisa Chen had proven that one person's commitment to justice and accountability could challenge systematic exploitation and create lasting change that benefited entire communities of workers who faced similar challenges in corporate environments where power imbalances had traditionally enabled abuse without consequences. The high-definition exposure of Victoria's behavior had demonstrated that private executive misconduct could no longer remain hidden, and that comprehensive documentation provided the evidence necessary for criminal prosecution, civil liability, and systematic corporate culture transformation. Their story continued to inspire employees, advocates, and policymakers who recognized that protecting workplace dignity required both individual courage and systematic change that addressed power imbalances while holding all corporate leaders accountable for their treatment of the workers whose contributions made business success possible. The lasting legacy included not just legal protections and policy changes, but also cultural transformation that recognized the inherent dignity of all workers and the responsibility of corporate leaders to create environments where everyone could maintain their professional respect while contributing to business success and community prosperity. If this story touched you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments what part resonated most with you. Until next time.